I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Yeshiva Review, and I'm here today at Orayta with Rav Benny Friedman and with Rav Judah Dardik. Thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate it.
Pleasure. Sure, pleasure.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself, Rav Benny? Who are you? Tell me a little bit about your background.
I grew up in New York. I was a typical modern Orthodox teenager, whatever that means. I went to MHS, which was Rebbe Riskin Yeshiva High School. When I was 18, I went to Israel. I went to Gush, to Yeshivat Orayta. Fell in love with the place. I was all set. I was going to go back to America. I got into Columbia. I was going to do pre-law. Couldn't leave. Decided to stay Shana Bet. And then I thought that I should stay and do the right thing, at least for me. So I went to the Army. I was in the Army for about 4.5 years. Became a company commander. After that, I wasn't going back to Columbia because I was like 23, 24, and basically stayed here, studied in Yeshivat Orayta, Rabbanut, teacher's degree, etc.
Wonderful. And Rav Dardik, how about you? What's your background?
I'm originally from New Jersey. Went to Mariah and Frisch, and then came to Israel for a couple years after high school to learn. Started at University of Pennsylvania, loved it, and had a problem, which is that I realized that what I really wanted to do in life is I wanted to teach. And I figured I would maybe be an American history teacher. I love the pre-revolutionary period. And at a certain moment, it hit me that more than I wanted to teach American history, I wanted to teach Torah. And Penn is a fabulous university, not a great pre-rabbinic program. So transferred over to YU, studied business, smicha, and thought, okay, I know my next step. I am going straight to Israel. That was my goal. And took what I thought was going to be a short detour, turned into 13 years as a shul rav of a fabulous and very diverse community in Oakland, California. After 13 years of just loving it there, community, that drive to be in Israel just couldn't be ignored anymore. Made Aliyah and came to Orayta, which was the yeshiva that could most fit my whole worldview, and very happy.
Well, what does that mean? Yeshiva that can most fit your worldview? In what way?
So, both in shul and in yeshiva, one of the things that I'm passionate about is helping people to find the way that they connect Jewishly. I'm not a big fan of trying to mold people in my image. There's already one of me. Hashem gave people free choice. So I want to let them have it. What I do want them to have access to is the brilliance of Torah, the depth of Torah, what a beautiful life and how insightful. So both there and here, I needed to find a place that would allow for difference of opinion, for people to think, to grow, to consider things from different perspectives. And I found a yeshiva that is solidly full of Talmidei Chachamim and committed to Torah and mitzvot, but also really gets that people can relate to mitzvot and to learning in different ways and help them find the way that's going to really work for them. And that open-mindedness was really the closer on coming here.
Then that sort of leads us into the reason that you originally started Orayta. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What was the first thought, the reason that the yeshiva had to open that was lacking out there in the wide landscape of other yeshiva when Orayta started?
I think probably most of all, it's a longer story how we discovered this. There seems to be a tremendous dearth of Jewish leadership. And by one method or another, we started to realize that there's a need to cultivate and create Jewish leaders. I'm not talking, by the way, about rabbis. I'm even talking about lay leadership. A student who goes through 12 years of Jewish school at Yeshiva Day School, Yeshiva High School, comes to Israel for a year or two, is going back to America, and the overwhelming majority of our students actually end up going back to college campuses. A lot of them go to Ivy League schools. We have students at Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Columbia and Penn and NYU. And this is the next generation of Jewish leaders. They have an enormous amount of Jewish content. They're broad enough and diversified enough that they can speak to the world. And the question is, do they have the tools with which to do that? So boys come here because they're looking for a serious journey into learning. It's 3 Sdarim a day. It's a serious journey into learning Torah. But they want more. They also want a broader perspective. They want to be able to gain a deeper understanding of the whys and the hows and the what-fors without losing that cold Torah, that intensity of learning that sort of characterizes the yeshiva world.
So would you say that Orayta's its essential difference is the fact that it emphasizes the whys and the hows in a way that's unique? Is that the description, or would it be something else?
I think it's a balance. Before we started Orayta, a person had to choose. He would either go to, Gush, Akota, or whatever, Keren B'Yavneh, and, get into serious learning, but he would never really have a chance to ask some of the questions that he had, and he would never gain a deeper understanding, never mind, looking for inspiration, or at least very often people didn't experience that. Sometimes you would have kids who would have lots of questions, they would want to explore the deeper philosophy, so they would go to Or Sameach, Eish HaTorah, whatever it might be, but at least in those days, they would certainly lose a serious learning program with their peers. And I think when we started, one of the ideals was that you could balance those things. You could have mastery and meaning at the same time. So boys come here and they have there's 7 different levels of Gemara. Some of them get deeply into Rishonim and they want to understand the complexities of the analytical, brisker approach of learning Gemara and so on and so forth.
And you have that as well?
And definitely have that as well. At the same time, I think since a lot of these students are going to campuses, so one of the challenges is not what's the essential different perspective of the Ramban or the Balamor on a particular topic in Talmud and Gemara. The question also is, what is Judaism all about? You ask the average student who graduates Yeshiva high school whether he believes in God. I've done this. 99% of them will say they believe in God. Now, whether they're being honest or not, yeah, they do. Right? It's surprising. Then you ask them, okay, so what is God? And you get this blank look. They have no idea to answer the question because nobody's ever talked to them about that. Now, that's not such a big deal if you're coming to Israel and you're going to go, back after Israel to Ner Yisrael and you're going to sit and learn for 7 or 8 years, you'll figure it out. But if you're spending a year in Israel and then you're going to Columbia or Penn or Harvard or Yale or Princeton and on, never mind if you're going to Dartmouth or Michigan, you're going to get asked that question. And what are you going to feel like when you have no idea to answer that question? But I don't want you to misunderstand. We don't just, we don't sit around a round table with bagels and talk philosophy all day. There's a lot of serious learning that goes on. I just think a student should not have to give up one in order to have the other.
Very interesting. I want to ask you something about that particular point. Would you say that there is a fine distinction between, say, the Gemara and the Rishonim and doing the heavy learning in the classic sense and philosophy of the wise in the house, or do you integrate them together? How does it work?
This is very interesting. Yes and yes. The first yes is that the Gemara that we're learning is integrated into larger issues. Literally this morning, we were learning a sugya that had a back and forth between David HaMelech and his advisors about supporting the poor. But as we looked through the Rishonim and a couple of Acharonim, what we saw was also a larger discussion about sociology and economics. And so it all comes together. It was very interesting to see, which political party would Tosfot vote for versus Rashi's Maruma Sadeh. It was fascinating. Right. So it's part of it comes up in the discussion because the discussion is not abstract. There are very real issues of the way that one looks at the world and what they're offering, the different perspectives are. That's one piece. But I think another nuance of this is that philosophy of all its different sorts, be that Chumash, Nach, straight Machshava, Musar, it's not that, text is Gemara and philosophy is a discussion. Philosophy should be studied in text as well. Because one should be able, at the end of a year, to sit and open a Ramban al Torah or a piece of Rav Kook and work through that text and be a person who can grow to independent learning and then get to campus and be able to continue nourishing by looking at texts that the philosophical text should be treated as seriously as a skill to be developed as a Gemara skill or reading a Rishon.
No, I would just say we like to say we're a full balanced meal. We take the study of, Machshava as seriously as we take the study of Gemara and Halacha.
How much are you into the idea of, I want to tell you what the answers are, as opposed to, I want you to figure it out for yourself, and maybe there is no answer, or there is no one answer, or I don't know the answer. How do you balance that?
Look, first of all, I think this is true of this place, but certainly true for myself. I'm not a big believer in answers. I get very nervous when educators are telling their students, this is the answer. We're interested in sharing with our students what we love about learning, why we find it so powerful, so magnificent, what we love about Judaism, everything from Shabbat to wearing tefillin. What they decide to do with that essentially is up to them. I think it becomes clear that the Rebbeim here have very strong opinions on matters, but look, I learned in Gush. And Rav Luchenstein and Rav Amital, Zichronam Livracha, one of the things that I loved about that yeshiva was that they had very strong opinions, but you were not obligated to accept their opinions. You were obligated to struggle with their opinions. And that's okay. So obviously within the Dalet Amos of Halacha, if Lichtenstein felt that a person should keep Yom Tov Sheni, second day of Yom Tov, and you went to ask him, right, which actually wasn't his opinion, he believed you should keep prohibitions on the second day, but if you asked him, then obviously you were obligated to do that. But if you wanted to know whether you should go to a rally in support of Greater Israel or not, so he had a very strong opinion on the matter, and there were students who disagreed with him. And that's part of what characterizes Orayta. In other words, there's a very broad spectrum of ideas here. The boys do get a philosophy. It's not just about putting everything out there and then do what you want, but they also understand that they have to think for themselves.
I would just add to that in our students are coming from a relatively worldly background and are going into a wider world. Yeshiva is the beginning. This is not the end or the goal. Mm-hmm. This is helping them prepare for the next step, that there's a marketplace of ideas. And that marketplace gets quite a bit wider as you get out into the world, and you're all kinds of things, and there are really no particular boundaries in the world at large. And so the students are going to be exposed to everything. My job as a Rebbe is not to tell them what to believe or to try to get them to believe what I believe, but I think of myself as a relatively thoughtful person. I'm going to share with them, this is how I analyze the issue, and this is the conclusion that I got to, or the conclusions that I got to, and they will end up picking based on whether they think that the arguments are compelling. I think Torah ultimately beats all in that marketplace of ideas. It's the deepest that is. And there's quite a lot out there that goes together with it very well. And they will also pick based on their own intellectual proclivities and who they are, their natures. My answers may not be for them, but Rav Davidel, or Rav David, or Rav Adi, or Rav Bini, or Rav Aaron, or Rav Blau, et cetera, et cetera. These are all different people who may have a different angle on the same issue that will intuitively speak to that student in a completely different way.
And my job isn't to give a plug here, but I happen to agree with that approach for a very specific reason, because my feeling always has been that when a student goes to college, if you've answered all his questions, so to speak, if even such a thing were possible, great, what's going to happen now? Now he's got a brand new set of questions. If all you have is a series of answers you can look up in a notebook, you haven't learned how to think about the inevitable questions that are going to come up when you hit your Nietzsche professor. That kind of thing isn't necessarily going to help you. So the idea of having a thoughtful approach where you can develop an approach where it will feed on itself to allow you to develop new approaches in the future, along with what you said about having a textual-based learning where you can constantly look inside and develop the skills from inside too, I think that's very important too.
Yeah, I would also add one thing. I think one of the goals of any yeshiva is that it shouldn't be, and this is certainly the way Orayta looks at it shouldn't be a one-year program. Whereas let's say a student comes here and let's say he has the most phenomenal experience, and he falls in love with learning, and he falls in love with Judaism, and everything's great. Then he goes off to college, and you're busy, so you lose touch with him. I'm not sure to what degree your accomplishment lasts. I think it's at least a 5-year program, if not a lifelong program. Certainly,
What do you mean?
students.
What do you mean a 5-year program?
Well, in other words, we do a tremendous amount of alumni follow-up. Rav Judah's going to be at Penn this year. I'm going to be at University of Maryland in a couple of weeks. We do university campus programs. We have a summer internship program. We had almost 60 students who came this past year to come for our Alumni Week of Learning, and so on and so forth. We run retreats in summer camps so students can get away in the summer from the city for 4 or 5 days and have an intense learning and growing experience.
These are all Orayta alumni in particular.
Yeah,
right?
It doesn't mean you're expected to come here for 5 years.
Right.
It means
No, I
after you go
understand.
back,
Right.
we're still with you.
It means that as long as a student is in campus, he still has lots of new questions. One of the measures to me of the success of a program like this is to what degree does the student have a close relationship with the institution, with Rebbeim. You know, the Rambam, Maimonides, in his the second mitzvah that he lists as being the 11 central mitzvot in Hilchot Deir, which is basically the laws of character development. How does a person become a mensch? Which I study with the boys, because if you're going to learn all this Torah and you don't become a better human being, what's the point? His second mitzvah there is lehidabek biyodav, right? To cling to those who know him. Now, what does it mean that someone knows Hashem? Right? So it says vayeda Adam et chaveshto, and Adam knew even in a biblical sense. She becomes pregnant. She gives birth. In other words, he had a relationship with her. So those who know Hashem are those who have a healthy relationship with Hashem. So if you can discover role models in your life and they have a healthy relationship with Hashem, they're balanced, and you can maintain and grow their relationship, then you're always going to have a resource for the types of questions that inevitably come up. And we get calls and emails. We have online learning shiurim and chat rooms and whatever else, for students to access these types of questions because they need to continue to grow.
How does it work in terms of creating that relationship? I'm sure every yeshiva will say, or at least most yeshiva will say, we have a great relationship with our Talmidim, and to whatever degree it's true, what do you do to foster it? How do you make sure that it's real as opposed to the kind of thing? I mean, I understand that when they're alumni, you continue to keep the kesher. They're only going to want to have a kesher if they already had that kesher during the year. So what do you do to make sure that they actually feel close to you during this year?
We came to the conclusion a long time ago that the real growth happens not in classes, but in the one-on-one. So, first of all the Rebbeim here are here full-time. They're here all day. They have a very light teaching load in the afternoons, and every Rebbe, and when I say Rebbe, I mean morning Rebbeim, because morning Rebbeim sometimes also give afternoon shiur. Every Rebbe has his shiur, his 10, 12 guys, and he is obligated to have a meeting, to sit, whether it's a harusa of learning or a shmooze or discussion with each student in shiur, basically every week. So if you come into our base medrash in the afternoon during the break, etc., there's always Rebbeim sitting with different students and schmoozing with them. So it starts with getting to know them, and it starts with learning, but eventually it develops into very deep issues. Like if a boy is in yeshiva, I'll just give you 2 examples. If a boy is in yeshiva and he's not happy socially, he's not going to be happy in his learning. Right? So how do you pick up on that? If a boy comes to yeshiva and the Rebbe is so excited he's got a great Ramban to share with him, But the boy's girlfriend broke up with him the night before. He's not going to listen to Ramban. So a Rebbe is worth his salt if he gets to that stage where they have such a close relationship that the Rebbe is the person he wants to talk to.
That was actually one of the most attractive features to me of the yeshiva, was a place that you're expected to sit with the students. I think the other piece also is, for lack of a better term, I'm just going to call it being a real person. That there are educational models in which Rebbeim are, if you will, very far out of reach. And I think a person can revere a Rebbe who is so far and, in a way, a wonderful, almost perfected role model. But when Rebbeim are sitting in a shir and they are very real people whose home you go to for Shabbos, talk very directly with you and straight as real people in a conversation who respect you as a student, the sense of this is somebody I can really connect to, someone I can open up to, and someone who is real with me, who's not putting on some sort of an air of, this is what I think it should be, but I'm right here with you. It really becomes, in addition to Rebbe-Talmud relationship, it's also really a friendship. And I think friendships endure.
Orayta places a premium in developing a close relationship with students' parents. Obviously within the context of, the healthy dialogue and, students are aware of this. Every Rebbe is in touch either by email or by phone with the parents of his shir every month, sends regular emails, etc. We have a parents program.
What is that?
Some years it's 1 week a year, and some years we do 2 different ones based on the calendar and when the vacations fall out. But we invite parents to come for a week, and they come and they sit and learn. Moms, dads, they sit in the basementers, they learn with their kids, they come to the regular shiur. It's not a special program where we do special shiurim. They just come. We plan it so that we're starting new topics that week. And parents can come and sit in on the classes. They can meet their son's Rebbe. They can develop a relationship with them. They can stay in touch with them via email. And this is especially valuable when the year ends and boys are back on campuses, because the best partner you can have in terms of continue to grow the relationship with a student is a parent. I can't tell you how many times this happened, but like last summer it happened again. There was a boy, I'm friendly with him, close with him, and but I hadn't spoken to him in a couple months, and I get an email from the father, can I call him? So I called him up, because he had been on a parents program like 3 years earlier, and we still have a relationship. He said, look, that he's been going out with this girl for like almost a year and a half. Well, she broke up with him last night. He's like devastated. Do you think you could reach out to him? So of course, I called him, and I had a discussion with him till my 3 o'clock in the morning, which I never would have had if I hadn't had this relationship. Now, eventually, I would have found out. So parents are your partners. Never mind the fact that when you meet a boy's parents and you develop a relationship, you begin to understand the student. So I think that's also an aspect of, and it goes both ways. When a kid goes back to America and he's gotten into learning, or to whatever degree of intensity he's discovered, sometimes students are nervous. You could have a student who came from a family with less background, and he's decided he wants, to keep kosher, whatever it might be, because we'll take about, this year out of 60 boys, we'll have, I think, like 6 or 7 kids who are NCSY kids, public school kids. I think they're superstars. These are kids who grew up in homes that were, let's say, less affiliated. They got turned on in some Jewish youth group, Akiva, NCSY. They want to come and spend a year in Israel. It's a huge stretch for their parents to send them. You have to really give a lot of credit. And then they get into the zone. Now they're going back to a family that supported them in their quest to come to Israel, but the family didn't have a year in Israel. They still drive on Shabbat. How does a kid navigate that? Obviously, if you have a close relationship with your student, you can help. But imagine if you also have a close relationship with the parents. It makes it so much easier.
What kind of student in particular would want to come to Orayta? I mean, you can describe some students, you have 6 or 7 a year, who are kids who came through NCSY. You have other kids who came from, I assume, regular day school backgrounds. What student in particular would say that's the place for me? Is there any common denominator?
So, at the risk of giving away your recruitment secrets, I'll tell you, the thing that I think characterizes the guys who are successful here, are the ones who come here most, is they are intensely curious. Intellectually curious, spiritually curious. Some of them are great Gemara learners.
When they come in,
and quite frum, and really intensely want to know more, experience more, learning spiritually. And some of them really are coming from, as Rabini mentioned, weaker backgrounds, don't have that background, but they have a thirst for it. We're not particularly good with par of students. Students are kind of like, I'm here, entertain me. That's not going to work. There's so much to offer here, but you have to be somebody with drive. And when we find the students with drive, they fly here.
Well then, what kind of student would not succeed?
Par of kind of, I'm here. I knew I always was going to go to Israel. I might as well. I hear it's a pretty decent place. I like the old city. It's a beautiful location. I hear the Rebbeim are good. Yeah, that's a good place to kill a year. You can't kill time. Time is the most important asset you have. Time is valuable. No, that's not going to work.
Yeah, I would add, I agree with you, Judah. I would add a couple of things. I think there are two significant cohorts of students who come here and really succeed. One of them is the student who comes to Israel, he wants serious learning. He was serious in high school. A lot of the boys come here, they're from very high shiurim, yeshiva high schools where they were in. They want to develop their skills in learning, etc. They don't want to give that up, but they also want more. They want to develop a deeper understanding. They know that they're going to campuses where someone's going to say to them, so, like, what are those black boxes you're wearing every day? And nobody ever asked them that question before, and they want to know, why do we wear tefillin? What does it mean? Right? I think some of them also want to see if they can transform the Judaism. But this isn't the kid who's at risk. He's not. He's going to go to campus. He's going to be from. He would never entertain going to University of Wisconsin. He's going to Penn because there's a big hill there, right? And some of them study. Last year we sent 15 students to YU and so on and so forth. But they want more. That's one group. So those groups, you can see, you come into our basement late at night, and they're sitting here, and they're steiging, and they're learning. And our question is, can we get them to a ketsos on the one hand, and on the other hand, can they sit around at a Starbucks with a few fellow students that they met on campus and have a learning session with them and explain to them why Judaism is so beautiful, etc. Then you have a second group of kids. These kids are actually struggling. I would say they're minority. I think there was a time at Orayta where there were more of them. Out of 60 kids, 20, 25, whatever it might be, they're struggling. They have a lot of good questions, but they're not angry. They're not cynical. They really want to learn. They're motivated. They're excited that finally, I think these kids are sometimes very bright because they've been asking these questions for a while. They're smart enough to recognize that some of the responses they've been getting are not really, it has to be better than that. And they're looking for it. And they're prepared to put in the work to get it. That's who really makes it here. The student who doesn't make it here, look, sometimes you get a kid, he finishes high school, maybe yeshiva high school, and he's done. He's burnt, he's toasted, he's finished, he just doesn't know what to do with himself. He knows he's not ready for college. Everybody's going to say, let's go have a good time. That kid is not wrong. That's where he's at. That kid does not belong in a 3-star-a-day yeshiva with serious learning. He'll be miserable. And look, the nature of the beast is, if you take 60 boys, you're going to miss it on 1 or 2. And we help them find other programs. Sometimes they find the program we'd love them to go to. Sometimes they don't. But they don't fit here. But they don't fit here because they're transgressing, they're doing some terrible thing. They don't fit here because everybody around them is motivated and excited and wants to learn. And they're not in that zone.
Well, how do you take groups of kids who are really coming from different backgrounds like that? In other words, on the one hand, you're saying that a kid who's not motivated at all, and more power to him, that's what he wants to do, he's honest about it, he shouldn't come here. You have some kids who are learning ketsos. You have other kids who, they're really not there, but they're curious and they're interested. Yeah. These are very different kinds of kids. At the same time, you want to have a unified group. You don't want to have a group of 2 different sections or 3 sections where they don't really have any interaction. Is it a unified group, or do they sort of do their own thing? How does it work here?
So I would tell you 2 things. First of all, I think one of the goals, this is not just something that happens by byproduct. I think one of the goals that we have here is to create a sense of community. For example, there was one year where we felt we had too many students from New York. So we limit, right? There are certain schools from New York, SAR, Frisch, Ramaz, whatever. I
can't imagine what that means, too many students from New York, but okay.
Okay, right. It's we want a much more broader spectrum. So this year, for example, I can look up the statistics if you want, but we have about 40% New Yorkers, 60% from all over the country. We have kids from something like 32 different locations this year. From everywhere, from Chicago to Houston to Los Angeles to Toronto to Montreal, and on and on. And that's first of all. Second of all, when they get here, before we start them into serious learning, we want to first create a sense of community. So, for example, the first day in yeshiva, the first night when they come here, we do a whole welcome circle. Kids have to get to know each other. The first day, before we get to the base manners, we want to create a healthy community. So we take them on the road. We do a shiur bashetach. This year we gave a mini shiur on Yoshua. We did it down by the Yarden. We went on a water hike. Nachal Kibbutz. The whole goal of that day, we play name games. We want boys to learn as many names of as many kids. There's an enormous amount of thought that goes into how we rule them, what shiurim they go to. And then we do what you can see here on our wall. We put up a poster chart with the pictures and names and locations of every boy in the yeshiva and all the staff. And we push boys. And, I usually wait about 2 weeks. And then at the beginning of a shiur, I give a Rambam shiur to half the yeshiva one day, another half the yeshiva, another 4 days a week. And I'll wait about 2 weeks, and then I'll say, okay, I want everybody to look around the room. Do you recognize every name who's here? Now, don't answer this question. If nobody is, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you don't know everybody's name. If nobody raises his hand, then I'm going to put you on the spot. If you do, then I won't. Be honest. So there's always like 5, 6 kids who raise their hand. There's someone they don't know. So I say, okay, you got 3 options. You can either ask somebody what's his name, or you can go over to the board afterwards and look up his picture. You can go to them afterwards, but I'm going to ask you whether you know their names, right? And they do. They all know each other's names. B is, it could be that they have different skill sets. Look, that's what you have in high school. You have different levels in high school, it works. But they share something in common. They all want the same thing. So if a kid comes here and he wants, when the Rebbeim are sitting at the beginning of the year, so 2 of the things that we push the Rebbeim to do is to help the students create a healthy schedule, obviously, like what are you doing at night, what are you doing, and to create a healthy set of goals. Like, what are your goals for the year? So, for example, I make it a point to sit with every student in yeshiva. It's a lot of work the first few weeks of the year. So it's like 70, 30-minute meetings in the basement all day and all night and whatever. And one of the questions I ask them is, what are your goals? Now, you get some amazing answers. Well, I want to become more inspired Jewishly. I want to learn how to learn. I want to whatever. So then you ask them, okay, so how do you know if you're succeeding? And then you get that deer in the headlights look again. How do you create metrics to measure whether you're succeeding, right? And what's fascinating is, even though they're coming from different spaces, you get a kid from, an all-boys high school who comes with his hat and whatever else, and you get a kid from public school. I mean, that's about as wide a disparity as you can imagine. They all have the same goals. They want to learn how to learn. They want to grow in learning. They want to develop their system. And you ask them these questions a month later. I just had this discussion with the group yesterday, so we're weeks into the year already. We're already in Charizman. They still have all the same goals. They're not saying this just because it's what they think you want to hear. They know you don't. Like, you want to know what they really want. I think that's why you create a sense of community.
I very much agree with Ravini. I would add on one thing, which is that beyond the deliberate geographic diversity and getting into this new space, is that they're all now finished with high school. And this is a new world. None of them are from the old city. None of them have come here. There's no one here who is, if you will, the native. Everyone's arrived together. We're all in a new experience. Some of them have learned Gemara with Rishonim well. Some of them, a few of them maybe never cracked a Gemara before, or not in any substantive way. However, when they arrive here, there's something new. I can pretty well guarantee that they have not studied Machshava in any great depth. And even as they've learned Gemara, and some of them come in with very good skills, to what extent, and this really is a function of high schools and trying to educate in high school. The high schools do a great job. It's complicated. To what extent have they been able to go into deeper layers of thought? And there are dimensions of what we're learning both in Gemara and out of Gemara that really no one has touched yet. And if you're bright, you may not be able to read Aramaic quite as well yet, but you can think. You put two thinkers in a room, they share something in common now, and this is a new adventure for both of them. High school's over. This is new.
Rav Judy, you've mentioned a few times the Old City.
Yes.
Orayta has the advantage of being in the Old City. How does that affect the curriculum? Is there something about being in the Old City, other than it being a wonderful location, greatest location in the world, that makes it into the nature of the yeshiva itself?
It's an interesting question. I'm going to answer your question and maybe also add on, I think, in full disclosure, another side of it. I think that being in the Old City, it is an incredibly spiritually conducive environment. It allows for things like, on the spot, little mini tiyulim. If I want to take my shiur before Truma Tetzaveh to the Temple Institute and go see not only replicas but things that are being built for the third Beit HaMikdash, or go down to the southern wall and we're learning a sugya, and then go see, oh look, in the southern wall excavations they have found the tickets mentioned in the 6th parak of Shkalim that are the coupons you get when you buy an animal for a korban. This is the economics of the Mikdash. So go and actually see it. That's an incredible opportunity. I think that it also, in terms of the guys being prepared for leadership, the Old City is not a city of cars, but it is full. There are people here all the time. The opportunities to make a Kiddush Hashem, to reach out, to meet somebody, to be out there when our guys dance down to the Kotel in Simchas Torah. And all kinds of people are there, what just happened? And here comes this bunch of yeshiva guys and they're dancing. I think they're very aware of being in a wider world that looks to them for leadership. The piece I would add on, and I believe this very firmly in terms of for all your listeners picking yeshivot, is that every great strength, every remarkable quality of an institution or person is also potentially a weakness, just depending on who you are. So I think the Old City is incredible for a lot of different reasons. There are students who sometimes come along and I speak with them and I ask them, how do you feel about more urban settings? And there are people who just don't like that, who wouldn't apply to a college in a city. They want to be out in the country. And they have to know, it's the Old City. If someone is very easily distracted, well, the Old City is full of distractions. They're wonderful distractions, and everybody and their cousin's plumber comes to visit. But so you have to know, are you a person who has the discipline and the focus to be able to sit and learn when there's a million things going on around you in the city? And that's a balance. And sometimes I speak to a student and say, I'm not sure, is the Old City going to be right for you? It can be incredible, and it's like everything else, a plus and a minus. You need to know yourself. Is this a good place for you?
Well, does it ever happen that a student will come really thinking that he wants to be in the Old City rather than thinking through, I'd like to be an Orayta, and as a result, it isn't such a great shidduch? Has that ever taken place?
Look, first of all, when I meet students, and I think we all do this, I always tell them, don't come to be in the Old City. Like, that's a bonus, but that's not why you should come here. You should come here because you identify with these teachers and you really want the content that they have to offer. Because if you love the content, you'll have a phenomenal year wherever you are. And if you come just to be in the old city, but it's not what you're looking for, you won't be happy. So, and by the way, this is a piece of advice, nothing to do with Orayta. I think the real challenge when students are deciding where to go is, what are you really looking for? There is a place that offers you what you're looking for, and that's what you have to find. In terms of your question about the old city, look, I will tell you that the context of experiencing what you experience in a year of serious learning in Israel within the context of the old city it's mind-blowing. I'll give you two examples. On Simchas Torah, so we dance with the Sifrei Torah. We do the first hakafa inside the Beis Medrash, and then we take over the Rova, right? And we dance all over the Rova. It's unbelievable. So one of the hakafot, dancing with the Torah scrolls, we went down into the Sifrei Torah. We went down into the Karta. So stop them before we were about to start the next hakafa. Like, take a moment to realize where you are. You're standing on a street that was built basically post-Hadrianic persecutions by Jewish slaves. It was forbidden for Jews to walk there. It was a symbol of the might of the Roman Empire, Pax Romana. And here we are in a modern state of Israel, in Yerushalayim. We're about to dance with our Sifrei Torah, and where's Rome? Like, that has to change the nature. Now, think about how many times during the year you do that within the context of, I did something, I was once doing a sugya with the guys in Shabbos, and there's a sugya that talks about, there's a topic that talks about different types of ovens, the difference between a kira and a tanur. So they found this particular type of oven, a kira, in the southern excavations. So I said to them, instead of discussion this year, let me show you. So we went down to the southern excavations, everyone wanted to come, and we saw it. It's unbelievable. Right? You stand up on our rooftop, which is overlooking Har HaBayit, and you do Kol Nidre up there. We do Kabbalat Shabbat up there. And you get, to Mikdash Melech, Kumi Me'emaka Bacha, like rebuild it, and you're looking at it. That has to change your context. That being said, I don't think that that's the primary reason a student should come here. So,
what would be something that Orayta needs to improve on? Something that you don't do as well as perhaps you should, and are you doing anything to make that better?
I guess there's two sides to that. One is educationally, and one is in terms of logistics and physical. I would think it's pretty safe to say nobody comes to Orayta for the dorms. It actually doesn't bother me. I think it's
What do you mean? What do you mean? In what sense?
Well, the old city, it's an amazing campus to be in, but space is at a premium. So when I was in Gush, we had this huge room. It was awesome. It was very easy to clean the room because there's lots of room. We had a cupboard, whatever. You could have fit 4 Orayta rooms into my Gush room. Like Rav Judah said, every strength is a weakness. Space is very hard to come by. We lease our space from the yeshiva that presents its pros and its cons. That being said, I do think it's a self-selecting process. It's because a student recently said to me, first of all, I think I think there's something valuable to lower people's expectations. We kind of have a reputation of that for dorms, and very often because of that, students come in and they're not so unhappy with the dorms. But one of the students recently said to me, Jacob, said, it's actually good because, first of all, the students are, I was really nervous about the dorms, they weren't as bad as I thought. But I realized, all the students I'm with are guys who came to yeshiva knowing that they weren't going to be in luxury. Mm-hmm. There's an advantage to that.
Oh, for sure.
But you have to want that, So that's physically one thing we can improve on. And, if anybody listening wants to help us improve on it, I'm always up for that. I would say educationally, I think one of the most powerful things any institution can do is to constantly be self-evaluating. And we're doing this all the time. We always, at the end of the year, think about our schedule and tweak it. In terms of our staff, in terms of our educational program. This year there are a few things we're doing. Just to give you one example, because he won't bring this up because it was partly his and Rabbi Aaron's idea. We have 3 Rosh Yeshiva, Bilal, myself, and Rabbi Aaron. And we used to do these things in a different context, Rabbi Aaron and I. But Rav Judah is really driving this project. We're going to have a retreat for the boys in December. I think we're doing it down near the Dead Sea. And it's basically a cell phone-free weekend. It's going to start on Thursday morning. We're going to go down and do a teal. It's going to involve a lot of educational dialogue, and all the boys know that they have to leave their cell phones. There's no cell phones.
Leave them behind. Leave them in the dorm.
Yeah, Rebbeim as well. Any Rebbe who wants to come has to come for the whole thing. I'm predicting a couple of guys are going to be challenged by this, but we never did this before. This is an experiment because we see that there's something, there's a need to develop an educational program to teach the boys something.
I just add, this is one of the things I'm most excited about is taking them out. Imagine being out in, it's beautiful, it's the desert, but what it means to go so long. We're used to Shabbat, and we go Shabbat without a phone. But then what do people do right after Shabbat? We run straight to our phone, and that includes me. But what does it mean to take 3 days and be fully focused on the people around you, to take a tiyul with no photos? Your photos are what you see. and to be talking to the people next to you, not thinking about what you're projecting into the world, and then do a hike in pitch black in the middle of the night together and go journaling a bit, what the thoughts are that are going through your mind. I think it's really, it's an inner, you go outside to go inside. And it's a great exploration. And this sort of thing, we're constantly trying to look at what was successful in the last years and how can we up our game, keep innovating.
Well, maybe you answered this already, but here's a bit of a thinking question. What type of experience or event or anything else would take place in Orayta that, in all likelihood, would take place in no other yeshiva? In other words, something in the person's experience that had he not come to Orayta, he would not have gotten that thing anywhere else, whether it's a type of learning, whether it's a type of tiyul, anything like that.
Wow, that's a really good question. Look, nowhere else is a pretty broad statement. I haven't done enough exploring to know that there's nowhere else. In fact, I know of something that we used to do that no one else did, and now there are a couple of yeshivot to do that. I don't know if Orayta didn't do that, but I think that's awesome. Right? So I hope eventually the answer is nothing. Like, we should all be doing best practices. I guess if I had to pick something, I think something Rav Judah alluded to before, which is the focus on, certainly in the upper level shiurim, guys are going to have a shiur. Part of the shiur is going to be like every other shiur. When you're at the gush, you'll go through the Gemara. You'll see what bothers you. What are my questions? What do I think? Then let's see what Rashi says. Let's see what the Tosas says. Let's see what Ramban says. Why does Rashi not say Tosas? Why does Tosas say, and so on and so forth. But then you're going to get to the payoff, which is, okay, so what does this mean? How is this relevant? Why do I care if an ox scores a cow? I'll give you a great example. We were doing a sugya a few years ago in a difus bracha. In other words, if it's a sugya brachas, if I have a plate of food, I don't know, there's a piece of cake there and a piece of chocolate, so what do I eat first? So now I think that so that's an important discussion. The different Rishon, different opinions, should you go with the broad first, the narrow, whatever the different spectrum of discussions are. But at a certain point, if you're an 18-year-old and you've come out of high school, part of your question is, well, why do I care? What's the difference? Like, if I like my chocolate bar better, eat the chocolate, what's the difference, right? And in order to respond to this question, you first have to ask yourself, what's a bracha? And you ask the average person what's a bracha, he'll say a blessing. You say, okay, what's a blessing? And most people don't really think about this. If you ask the average person, so what is it you're doing? You take a piece of bread, you pick it up, Friday night, and you're saying what? Most people will say thank you. But that's not true. The word bracha does not mean thank you. The word todah means thank you. We have lots of brachot, lots of blessings that speak of thanks. So Soloveitchik suggests that levarech is to increase. Hashem berachet Avram bakol, Hashem increased Avram's wealth, his progeny. If you look at Rashi there, what is it I'm increasing when I make a bracha? I'm increasing the presence of Hashem in my life. Now I can go back to the sugya and say, okay, so how does the bracha of Shakol, that a chocolate bar which looks nothing like the earth, right, reflects the reality that all of reality, right, that the source of all reality is Hashem. How is that different from eating an apple where I can see God's hand in nature? What are those two different ideas? And which one of those should come first and why? Now you get into a theological existential discussion. So if you love the theological existential discussion, but you never get to go through the Gemara and Sugya, then you're missing the beauty of Gemara and you're not learning how to think and whatever. But if you go through the beauty of the Sugya and you never get to that existential discussion, you're missing something equally beautiful. I sense that that's a dichotomy that does not exist in many places, which I think is a shame. So, and the only reason I suggest this is because when I go to campuses, which we do a lot, so very often students want to have certain experiences with you on their own. Friday night dinner, I'm sure you have the same thing. And then they want you to meet all their friends. And inevitably that talks into a Q&A. And this is the topic that most fascinates many of the students who went to a lot of these primary yeshivot. And very often they say they wish that they had had more of a chance. Now, by the way, I don't want you to misunderstand. I think there are other yeshivot that do this in different contexts. Right? So I don't know if this is not done. I hope it's done everywhere. But I do sense that that's something that very often happens uniquely here.
I'm thinking about what Rabini said. I agree. I'm imagining what's different, right? There's nothing quite like Ne'ilah overlooking Har Bayit. Yeshivat Orayta is right next door to us. It's not absolutely unique, as Rabini said. Thinking about that, I'm thinking about the Ruach at an Orayta Tish and the Torah being shared at Tish. I think the thing that probably, and the Tiyulim we're mentioning, probably the one that stands out for me is we have regular panels. Take a sensitive question and put multiple Rebbeim up there. And the goal of the panel is to see the variety of opinion, the different approaches, and watch guys' heads nod when they listen to different Rebbeim. If I may characterize Rabini, I think we have 3 Rosh Yeshiva. To have on one staff working together as close friends and colleagues, a Rosh Yeshiva who is an expert in Kabbalah and Rav Kook, and all things spiritual.
Speaking about Rabbi Aaron.
Rabbi Aaron, remarkable things to say. That watch people's eyes open and say, I never knew that a person could think about it like that. And the other end, Rav Blau, also tremendous Talmid Chacham, who's a medieval rationalist. And if I may have been here, a little harder to pin down, but if I may embarrass the Rosh Yeshiva, somebody for whom the Rambam is the guide to life. And you think about 3 Rosh Yeshiva, and then you think about the Rebbeim, and think of any question you could throw their way. Once we had a panel, 3 Rosh Yeshiva, and the question was, does Hashem run the world? Listen to 3 people from those backgrounds speak about this topic, and watch everyone's eyes open, and then watch the guys look at each other and figure out that their roommate, their chavruta, approaches this so differently than them, and each person has found his way in Jewish thought that is appealing and compelling and moving.
So, Rabbi Benny, in terms of that, do you find yourself disagreeing with your colleagues often? Is that something which you celebrate, or do you try to come to some consensus in general when teaching the kids? In other words, are you looking for, well, I have my opinion, Rabbi Aaron has a very different opinion, for example, and that's okay? Or, well, really, we're going to try and meet in the middle, so there's a single derech we're presenting to the students ultimately?
Look, I think on the one hand, what makes any organization successful is that everybody shares the same core values. So, for example, a Rebbe here who wasn't a sensitive person, which is a value. Sometimes you have Rebbeim, and it's hard for us to judge, who I remember hearing famous stories about Rabbi Yerucham Leibowitz, who would stand in front of a mirror to kind of train himself to smile, right? Okay? That's admirable. I don't think that kind of person would survive here. Like that, there's such a warm culture, right? It's an institution which very much views the state of Israel, on the other hand, as at least atchalta dereshi gulatenu. But there's a Rav here on staff who's an amazing personality. He thinks that people shouldn't be going to the army; they should be sitting and learning. And we disagree on that, and that's awesome. The students know we disagree on that. And I think there's value for that. I've actually never had a discussion with him, which is kind of funny because we're together a number of years. I imagine he doesn't say halal the bracha. I don't know if he says halal. But the fact that it never became a contentious issue, right? And he's been with us on Yom Ha'atzmaut is itself...
That itself is the point.
Is the point.
Well, then how about this in terms of Israel? Do you, as a yeshiva, present politics as part of the curriculum? Meaning, do you sort of advocate a right-wing or left-wing approach towards politics, or is that something which has nothing to do with the learning, or some shiluv?
That's a really good question. I would tell you a few things. First of all, I personally try to stay above politics. It's like I don't mind sharing with them my political opinions at the end of the year. I think it's very dangerous. I think students who come at the age of 18 after high school are a very sensitive age. The Rebbeim that they study with, who basically introduce them to a world that's incredible, become larger than life. Even if you're doing it subcon, you don't even realize you're doing it. It's so easy to manipulate a student at that stage of life. So we have to be extremely careful to be presenting them with ideas and not to be manipulating them or pushing them in one direction or another. That being said, once we feel that they're in a healthy space and they know who they are and they've developed their own opinions, it doesn't bother me. Usually this happens a lot more with our alumni on campuses, right? I don't think students have any idea whether I'm a Likud voter or a Mafdal voter, different parties in the Israeli Knesset. I think students can figure out. I'll give you, by the way, another example, which is less about politics. Or, we're going through a U.S. election. It's a very challenging U.S. election. Very different energies and different candidates. I haven't spoken to students about who I would vote for. I'm going to vote. I think it's important to vote. But even on issues that are, sort of maybe are more clear to them that we have opinions on, like, for example, serving the Israeli army. So it may surprise you. I don't think every student here should be going to the Israeli army. I think sometimes there's some boys who come here and they're all gung-ho. We've had students who, I remember once we had a boy from Chicago, and the Rebbeim in the high school and his father wanted me to talk to the boy because the boy was all set to go to the army, and they thought it'd be a disaster. So I sat with him and I said, look, I'm being honest with you. I never convince a student of anything. I'm going to share with you what you decide. In this case, I'm going to make an exception. You should not be going straight to the Israeli army. He came to Orayta, had a phenomenal experience. Towards the end of the year, he was really growing. There was one Rebbe here who thought it should stay Shana Bet. I disagreed. I thought, he was on Shpilkas. He was ready. He had put in a year of learning. It was a lot for him. I didn't think he was ready to do another year of learning. He was so itching to go to the army. I said, no, don't do it to him. So he went to the army. It's his decision, but I didn't think it would be good for him. He went to the army. He was in Nachal. He actually fought in Sukeitan in the Gaza War 2 years ago. He was a sergeant. And now he's studying in university. And believe me, he's in a good space Jewishly. Everybody has to find their path. No, I don't think we should be pushing them in those directions.
I think rather similar. My students don't actually generally know my opinion when it comes to something political, and I made a point of this in my shul. 13 years, I'm an independent, and I don't think anyone would know. I would have times that I would give a drasha or speak. I did not speak politics, but people come to me afterwards and say, wow, I'm so glad Rabbi, that you're a Republican like me. I'm so glad you're a Democrat like me. And I'm just smiling because the drasha was never about politics, and they assumed from my values that I was speaking to their values, which I was speaking about values. Same thing with my students. I don't think they know my opinion. My goal is I want to make the strongest argument I can for political position A and for political position B. I want them to hear the strengths, as I analyze it, of both arguments as well as the weaknesses, because they'll make their own decisions. Torah has a great deal to say. Politics is a highly negotiable art of trying to take values and apply it to society. So we'll figure it out.
Now, in terms of college, and YU, the whole question, Shana Bet, you mentioned Rabbini, do you push a particular path when they're done? Do you say, we really want, obviously, so not everybody, but most students to come Shana Bet, we want them to go to Yeshiva University. No, you shouldn't go to Yeshiva University. Is there a policy that the yeshiva has in terms of it, or?
Very individualized. There are students I've spoken to who were inclined to YU, and I really wasn't sure that would be an environment in which they would thrive, and tried to direct them to think about alternatives. There are students who were looking at secular universities I thought would do great there, and it's, let's get you ready and have you go to campus and be a real force. And there's students I've spoken with said, listen, I really think YU should be on your list, because that really may be where you're going to thrive. It's so much a function of who this person is, their personality, where they're going, what they can offer, what they need, the support that they need. The goal is really, when they graduate, who are they? How are they doing? And I think a lot of students do very well at YU, and a lot of students do very well elsewhere. So the overwhelming majority of our graduates have been across the map. And the same thing with Shana Bet as well as the Army. There are people who will thrive, and people for whom that will really be a detrimental experience, and Shana Bet as well. It's not for everyone. There are students for whom that is a critical experience for a variety of reasons, and students who it's really time for them to take the next step. This is not forever.
Yeah, I also think that sometimes, putting aside the whole question of yeshiva universities, secular colleges, which secular colleges, I think we also have to be sensitive to where a student's head is at. It's true that sometimes you see a vision and you see where a student is going. So obviously if a kid is going to, University of Wisconsin, so that's usually not a good idea from a Jewish perspective. But at the same time, what do you do when a boy is choosing a path and you see this is what he wants, this is where he's going to go? You're not going to change his mind. I've met too many students where Rebbeim spent all year trying to convince the person to change his mind. The boy doesn't change his mind, so what essentially happens, he feels he's let down his Rebbeim. So you threw out the baby with the bathwater. He lost the relationship with his Rebbeim. We had a student like that. This is by no means indicative of the larger student body here. It was a rare exception. But he was going to university itself challenging. But more importantly, he wanted to be a U.S. Marine and ROTC and so on and so forth. At a certain point in the year, you realize that's where he's going. That's who he is. So, I'm in touch with him. And there's another Rebbe here who went and visited and spent time with him, whatever. It's going to be a long journey to get him through 4 years of school. And if you take on the responsibility to accept a boy like that, then you got to know that's a possibility. And will you stay in touch with him and help him develop as a Jew?
One of the most egregious instances of the negative side of what you're saying. I once heard a rabbi say to a student who was going to go to, I believe it was Duke University. Mm-hmm. He told him, if you go to Duke, I'm going to tear Kriya. In other words, if you think about what message you're sending, you're saying, I don't trust you. You make that bad decisions.
Yeah.
I'm not really here for you anymore. There are all sorts of things that includes, but I think that's important. Just we're running out of time. I'm sorry, you have one more.
I'm sad to hear the story. I had a student last year, very dear to me, who's at Duke,
right,
who told me in the first or second week, I'm going to Duke, and Rebbe, I don't want you talking me out of it. I said, you don't know me yet. Who says I'm going to talk you out of it? So what we did, we made a plan. How are we going to help you be a force for Jewish life at Duke? And I'm getting wonderful WhatsApps from him about what he's doing, what he's introduced to other students, his preparedness, and his getting out there, and he's flourishing.
Let me ask one final question to both of you. How would you really describe at the end of the year, a student, he's done with Orayta, he's off to wherever he's going next, whether it's the Army, Shana Bet, college, an ideal alumnus, an alumnus who really got the most out of his year? How would you describe that person?
I guess the first thing that comes to mind is that he felt that he got a suitcase full of inspiration and content, mastery and meaning, and he wants to share it. If a student is back on campus and he's holding, that's the term people like to use, he's going a minion, he's doing whatever. So don't get me wrong, that's a hard thing to do and that's great. But if he's not sharing the beauty of Judaism with anybody, then I think we've missed something, right? So that's the first measure of success. The second, obviously, is that he's deeply involved with the Jewish, religious, whatever you define. Religious is a hard word to define. Now that depends where a boy is. There might be one boy. I would say the majority of our boys, Shmirat Tzvot, regularly learning Torah, very involved in the Jewish community. Many of them take serious leadership positions. The president of Hillel at Harvard was an Orayta boy. The president of Hillel at Penn, the president of the student union at Columbia. Like, the list is endless.
Right. President at University of Birmingham in England.
Any vice presidents or only presidents? Is that how?
I would say one more thing. That they stay in touch. If a boy does all that, but has no interest in Orayta, then we've obviously done something wrong. This boy at Duke. So I had long discussions with him. By the way, like, all kidding aside, like, our mission is not to send a boy to Duke so that he becomes the ambassador to get more kids to go to Duke. I don't really think a lot of guys should go to Duke. But that being said, if he's going to be there, I do think that the measure of success for a boy like that is he having more of an impact Jewishly on campus than the campus is having a negative impact on him. One of the ways of measuring success is, will he be here in January? Right? And he knows, like I spoke to him about
coming back for his winter vacation.
Yeah, I said, if you're going to go to Duke, you got to be here every year in January. You got to come here in the summer. You got to find a way to stay connected. And I think that he will. We'll see.
I think that the successful alum he's learned, he's learning, and has the skills to do so. He's passionate and he's consistent. Somebody has those qualities. They're out there. They're sharing it. They're on fire, and they have the ability to keep sustaining themselves. And yes, to keep in touch, but keep sustaining themselves. Then that's somebody who's going to go very far and who really drew from here what he could get.
Rabbeinu, Rav Judah, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
If you want to learn more about Orayta, go to www.orayta.org.